Hi, I'm Johnny, and this is Comics Altruism. This is my entry into Lady Fantastic's 150 sub contest, and she well surpassed that quite some time ago, so congratulations, Lady Fantastic. And she's given us a thinker here with her contest. What she wants from us is to explain 5 different elements or factors that make a great comic a great comic. And yeah, I had to kind of ponder over this one for quite some time, and that's why it's getting in right under the wire. Still going to leave the link to her contest below just in case you're able to find the time. And if you haven't subscribed to her, like chances are anybody who's subscribed to me is subscribed to her. But just in case, there's the link, so go subscribe to her because she's got some great stuff on her channel. I'll just get right into it, and I'll try to provide like 1, maybe 2 examples for each one so that I'm not going on for like 20 minutes. Alright, so the first factor, and these are in no particular order, but number 1 is ownership. And I put ownership in quotation marks because I'm not talking about actually owning the franchise or the title that one is writing, but I'm talking about doing the research into the character, knowing the character front to back, also making it your own, because once you know all that stuff about a character, you can feel free to adapt. But if you have no idea who you're writing, or at least you haven't immersed yourself into the character, then you're not going to end up with something that feels inspired or thoughtful or even respectful of the character for that matter. So my example here is Tom King's Batman. And I know my subscriber count is going to go way down because I said that. I know how most people feel about the Tom King Batman. I've only read 15 to 20 issues of that run, even though it's on my pull list, because I'm desperately behind on reading. But I did feel that he took aspects of the character that are basically unanimous across all the writers, but then he also added a little bit of his own. So like what Frank Miller did with Batman and with Daredevil, kind of taking the character and making it even darker. Tom King pulled that off wonderfully. He did what he aimed to do, and yeah, it's not what most people wanted, but he still succeeded in executing his vision. So Tom King's Batman, and I know I probably lost even more subscribers because I compared Tom King to Frank Miller, but next one is Originality, and this kind of goes into that creator-owned stuff because it's very easy to be original if you're not playing off of somebody else's character, if you can start from scratch. So Chew is a great example of original work, truly original work, and that's really hard to do as a creator of anything, to make something truly original, because everything's already been done basically, right? But they pulled that off wonderfully. Layman and Guillory, fantastic. And you can also have originality within a title, but go back to point number 1 about that, because it's basically just a reiteration of number 1. The third one, and this is what makes comics comics, is cohesive art. So within that realm of artistic vision, the cooperation between the writer and the artist, you already know all this stuff, so I'm not going to go into that. But, you know, sometimes it hits and sometimes it doesn't. Most of the interior art on comic books is just run-of-the-mill, because you can't be expected to be prolific but also be brilliant, you know, in the comic book industry. They're on such tight schedules based on what I've read that, you know, the interiors kind of have to be whatever, as long as it works with the story. So my example here is basically anything Batman by Lee Bermejo, but especially Batman Damned, because the grittiness and yet refinement of his paintings within the interior of the Batman Damned series, along with the other Batman titles that Lee Bermejo has done, it just suits the cerebral, sort of ethereal quality that Batman Damned has, where it's surreal, and it works really well. But then you can also take that concept of cohesive art and flip it on its head. So something like, again, with Chew, you've got John Layman's sense of humor, Rob Guillory's sense of humor, but then there's also like this grotesque and grisly side to that book. If you were to just read it as a script, you would get that sense of humor, but it would also seem pretty dark. And then Guillory is kind of like Scotty Young in that everything he does is sort of, it's got this juvenile tint to it, and it works really well to have the art not be cohesive. It creates this dissonance that's highly appealing, because you're sort of uncomfortable with certain things like dismemberment, but the pieces of the bodies look very like cartoonesque. So point number 4 is honest intent. And this kind of goes back to ownership in a way as well, which is why I put ownership as number 1. It's one thing to write and draw comics as just a living, right? And most of the people, I'm pretty sure anyway, who are coming up in the comic books industry, they're kind of handed the titles that nobody else really feels inspired to take in new directions. It's just kind of like, here's the status quo, we got some books to sell, this is what keeps us millionaires at the top, so just write it, put it out, we don't really care as long as it sells. And you know, that's all well and good as long as the artist or the writer is eventually going to move on to other things that they actually love. At least we can hope for their sake that they get to that point. But yeah, honest intent is when you're seeking as a creator to either enhance the medium or like to build it up, take it to new places, as we've seen from people like Eric Powell, and again, back to Chew, Layman and Guillory. You take what G. Willow Wilson did with Ms. Marvel, and I'm not the target demographic for Kamala Khan, obviously. I'm not a teenage girl, and I'm not Muslim, but you don't have to be those to appreciate like religious inclusivity or the empowerment of young females so that they don't just see the comic book industry as large breasts and wide hips. It doesn't have to be objectifying. And so she really is paving the way. She's done with Ms. Marvel, but she's still paving the way for other women in the industry to not have to subscribe to this ideal woman. You know what I mean? Probably got a little too political for most of you just there, but G. Willow Wilson is definitely an example of honest intent. Lastly, we've got depth. And by depth, I'm not talking about like philosophical depth where you read a book for 10 minutes and then you think about it for an hour. What I mean is that it's deep enough that you can immerse yourself in it. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a super serious comic book to be deep either. It can be exactly like what I was just saying about Ms. Marvel. That has depth because of its intent. See what I mean? It all kind of ties in together. Then you look at something like Postal. For anybody who doesn't know about Asperger's syndrome, it's a great sort of educational tool, but it's also like a very dark book that's very readable as well. But if anybody got into that not knowing what Asperger's syndrome is, they get a very quick education over those, whatever it was, 30 issues, I think. So there is depth in that as well. I've gone on too long. Lady Fantastic, congrats on the well over 200 subs. Thanks for the very thought-provoking contest, and keep up the great work. Okay, bye.